Hey all, just got done editing today's video. It's with Alison Fischer. Alison is a friend, a mentor, and just an overall badass, as you are about to see for yourself. She used to be a public defender in the United States. Now she's an academic here in the Netherlands. She's currently working on her PhD at the University of Leiden. And it was a really, really great conversation. We went way over time, I think almost an hour and 15 minutes, but it was totally worth it. You're going to want to check this one out. Really, really nice conversation. And thank you so much, Alison, for participating. And off you go. Okay. Well, hello, Alison. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I've reached out to you, I think, a week ago or something, a little longer than that. And we had a chat already about the format, so you kind of know what we're going to talk about. But as I mentioned before, I do really want to keep it very low key. Just have a little conversation about your career, where you're at right now, kind of where you come from professionally, and then also just really a big focus on what made you make the choices that you ended up making, and just yeah, perhaps if you can think of a couple of key moments, key times when you really realized you want to do something other than what you were doing before. And with that very brief introduction, I think it might be a cool idea if you could just introduce yourself in your own words, so people don't have to take my word for it.
Sure. Well, my name is Alison Fischer, and I am currently a first year, almost second year PhD candidate or student at Leiden University Law School and at the Royal Dutch Institute for South Asian and Caribbean Studies, which in Dutch is the KITLV. But I'm, I guess, a non-traditional PhD student. I'm in my mid 40s. And before that, I guess I'll go backwards. Before that, I was a teacher at the Politics, Psychology, Law, and Economics undergraduate program at the University of Amsterdam, which is how I know you. And before that, I was very briefly worked at an international criminal court. And then in the United States, I was a criminal defense lawyer in New York and Miami. And before that, I was a student organizer and I guess lobbyist on issues of education. And then I was a student. So that's my 20-year professional history. I'm also an American immigrant to the Netherlands, and I have a Dutch partner, and I have two bilingual kids. So that obviously comes into career at some point as well. And just kind of taking one day at a time in this pandemic, like everybody
Sure.
else.
Yeah, like everybody else, exactly. Cool. So yeah, just kind of hearing this, as you said, 20-year review, maybe be a cool idea to just kind of start at the beginning. Maybe we can really just go back to, say, college days. I believe you studied political science. I think that was your major. Is that right?
Very, very
Um,
good. Good
yes,
research.
I've done my research. I've watched a bunch of YouTube videos. um, I'm curious. Did you know that you were going to be a political science major when you went to college, or how did that initial sort of direction, how did that even transpire?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can go even further back. The answer is no. I went to the University of North Carolina and thought I would major in journalism. And I mean, we're having this conversation in Europe. I think American undergraduate is set up differently than European undergraduate. So you don't have to pick a major as an American undergraduate. At least you didn't in the 90s when I went to college. Um, and you could change it without a terrific consequence. But I had been on the high school newspaper and really liked that. And I think that was just because I always liked writing. And I think maybe very American. My parents were very career oriented from a very young age. So I think I was probably writing poems and rhyming, read and said and that kind of thing. And they were like, well,
Hmm.
what about journalism? That's a career where you can write. And I really did love it. I loved writing, and I was really lucky to be on a high school newspaper, which sounds so silly, but where the advisor really encouraged us to write about issues and be involved in local politics. And
Hmm.
um, so ironically, as a 16-year-old, I was going to the school board and we were lobbying for not censoring our student newspapers and things like that.
Right.
So I had kind of this activist politics experience very early, but
Hmm.
through the lens of being a journalist. And then when I went to the University of North Carolina in 1995, there was a big controversy because they were raising the tuition. And I got sent to cover a rally about raising the tuition for the university newspaper. And I was standing at that rally and I was like, talking to people and taking notes and being objective. And I remember this really clear sense that like, I don't want to be over here writing about it. I want to be over there participating in it. And that was kind of a flip for me. And so then I pretty shortly thereafter switched to political science, and I wasn't quite sure what that meant, to be honest. I
Hmm.
think jumping forward, when I would work at PPLE, like it's hard to describe to people what you do with a
Yes.
major in politics. You don't want to be a politician, but I just knew that those were the issues that interested
Hmm.
me. Issues of power, issues
Hmm.
of justice,
Hmm.
issues of what you could do about all those things. And the classes that I wanted to take were political science classes and also history classes, and kind of all you could do all that under the political science umbrella. So that's why I majored
Hmm.
in political science.
And honing in on that, I know it's a kind of a long time ago, but I really I think it's interesting the way you said that you realized that you wanted to be on that side rather than this side. Why? Like what was it about that situation or that time period where you were saying, I believe I have a larger impact, or I'm more interested in being on the other side rather than sort of like the journalism side of that?
I think that's a good question. I think I had come to journalism thinking that journalism was like activism, like that journalism was a platform for
Hmm.
advocating for a position, when in fact it can be, but that's not at all what, if you major in
Right.
journalism, that's not the bulk
Right.
of it. And I think it was really like, maybe this goes to how deeply arrogant I am. I think I had really strong opinions,
Hmm.
and I had I probably still do, I had like a very sharp sense of right and wrong. And I had no interest in pretending that I didn't feel very strongly one way or the other about issues like
Right.
access to education, or racial equity, or
Hmm.
gender equity, or those kinds of things. And a lot of that, it's still going on, but a lot of those movements and protests were going around um, in the time I was a student. And I knew I wanted to be a part of them. That's like the ideological aspect. I think also there was the emotional aspect, for lack of a better word. Like there was really a feeling of being a part of something, um, to work with other people on issues that you cared about, and
Yeah.
to have this shared goal. And I think that was and is incredibly emotionally rewarding. And I was
Hmm.
really drawn to that
Hmm.
um, as
A-
well.
and you essentially, did you ever pursue journalism after that again? Did you write articles here or there, or was there ever like a journalism stint, or
That's a
was
good
it really sort
question.
of like the
No,
end of it?
I've never been employed as a journalist.
Hmm.
But writing has been a huge part
Hmm.
of every career I've had since then, whether in
Right.
lawyering or teaching, or now,
Right.
um, yeah, now working on a PhD. I mean, the way I explain a PhD to my small
Hmm.
kids is I'm writing a book. That's true.
Yeah, that's true.
So those same kind of skills and description, and good writing is always a skill that you can use. So
Yes, I remember you saying that years ago,
I say that
and
all the
and, and I
time.
think
So
and I think you're right, and I think you're right. But okay, so you moved over to political science, and this was in your second year,
yeah,
second year
second or
college,
third
yeah.
year. Yeah.
You declare political science as your major. What's going on in your mind at this point? Like what are you interested in? What do you find yourself interested in academia, in the real world?
Well, let me say, I think if the purpose of this interview, right, is to help maybe people who are more in their 20s thinking about their career path,
Yeah.
I think what's more important than my major was what was going on at school at the same time.
Hmm.
So I did get really involved in student activist issues. And in the mid 90s, when I was in college, I feel so old. Those issues were at the University of North Carolina affirmative action, which is a process to try and recruit and retain and include, in this case, more racially diverse student body. North Carolina is in the southern part of the United States, so there's the legacy of segregation that really went all the way until the 50s. This was only the 90s. So the idea that they would be dismantling diversity programs when the diversity of the university still didn't reflect that of the state of the population seemed really alarming. Um, Again, everything old is new again, because we're having these same conversations all the time. But I got really involved in that activism and organizing, and then through that organizing at my campus, got connected to a national group of students that was doing this type of organizing and activism on a national level. And then um, the short version is I got a job with that organization after graduation. So, I think I had peers who went through maybe more traditional processes. And of course, with political science, there's no ideology associated with political science. So I had a lot of friends who went to go work for McKinsey, I guess would be the current equivalent. I think then it was
Yeah.
Anderson Consulting or whatever, or went to think tanks or, you know, taught high school. I mean, did all kinds of things.
Mm.
But for me, it was the outside the classroom stuff that led me into my first job.
Right. Okay. So, and then law, because
Yeah.
eventually you become a lawyer.
Yeah.
When,
So,
yeah, go on.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to preface it with something I've observed, that a lot of the American lawyers that I know, whether they be public figures or shared contacts that you and I have, a lot of them kind of used history or political science as sort of a ramp into law. It doesn't sound like this is your path at all to law. So how did it come about for you?
Well, I'm laughing. Again, I'm painting this picture of my parents. I think while I was doing this activism stuff
Mm-hmm.
and while I was talking about going to work for some, left-wing organization, that my parents were like, please just take the law school entrance exam. Like, just take the law school entrance exam, the LSAT, which is the big thing in the US. Like, just take it, and then you don't have to go, and then it's at least like a backup plan, right? And then Keeley, they offered to pay for it. So it was a couple $100, which was, a lot of, it still is a lot of money to take a test. So I had taken the exam, and then I thought, I'm not interested in going to law school because I want to make change. I don't want to just operate in this framework of law.
Right.
And so what happened was I had this job at the student organization, but because it was a student organization, you aged out after 2 years. They basically said, you can only work here within 2 years of having to be a student. And then we want new people who've just been students, which makes total sense. And you have to go. So I had moved on to another grassroots organizing job about prisons, about organizing against private prisons in the United States, which is still a problem. And in doing that, I got more exposed to criminal law. So that was kind of what was happening. I was working with a lot of people who'd been in prison. I was interfacing with a lot of prison activists, families against mandatory minimums, sentencing reform, that kind of thing. And then at the same time, 9/11 happened. So this brings us forward. And it's hard to imagine now, or maybe it isn't. Maybe the pandemic is actually a really good analogy to 9/11, where sort of everything is going on this path. So September 11th, 2001, politically and career-wise. And then there's this interruption. And suddenly everything is different. So I had been working on politically advocating against racial profiling, about prison reform. And what happened after September 11th is US politics didn't want to reform or stop profiling. They wanted to start profiling everybody.
Right.
So there was very little political traction to do anything other than react to 9/11 in the fall of 2001, which is when I was starting my sort of next political organizing job.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, I was just really unhappy. Like, I had moved to a different town. I missed my friends. I had taken my second post-college job kind of quickly without really, I think I'd taken the first job I got offered because I was afraid about not having a job. I'm being really honest here because I think this is how these decisions happen. So I was kind of had this job where, a lot like now, like I was working in my house by myself, driving around by myself, talking to people, and I was miserable. And I was like, what have I done? Like, what can I do? And there was this law school entrance exam in the back pocket. And so I thought, well, I really would like to live in New York City. I was living in Florida where I grew up, which I think was important, working on issues close to home, but also been cut off from all my university friends. So I applied to 3 law schools in New York City and I got accepted. And so after a year of kind of being unhappy and working out of my car, I moved to New York and went to Columbia Law School. And that's the honest story of how I got into law school.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, this is exactly the type of thing that we're kind of here to discuss because, a LinkedIn sort of as an ideal type of like what a career looks like to the outside world. It doesn't really tell you anything about the ways that people, took to get there.
I mean, this is a spoiler alert, like what, two spoiler alerts. I can only speak for myself, but I think if there is a theme, if there's like any wisdom that I would impart at middle age, it's that a lot of where you end up in your 40s is reacting to things that you couldn't see coming in your 20s.
Like 9/11.
Like 9/11, exactly. That's a big thing, but also just personal things. Like, I mean, again, spoiler alert, like I'm in the Netherlands because I met a guy at my little brother's wedding and we fell in love and I moved to a new country. So those things happen to you in a way that you can't plan out when you're thinking about what your career is going to look like
Right.
in undergrad.
Right. And I think it's a really, really difficult balancing act to not overplan and to still have purpose in what you do. I mean, this is essentially
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
because for me personally, I couldn't just go into every day. Some people maybe can, but I personally couldn't just wake up every day and just see what's good on like that spontaneous of like I can't be that, quick on my feet.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think I'm oversimplifying. Like I put the law school exam on my parents, and that was a big element of it. But it wasn't like they were like apply to medical school, which was something I had
Right.
no
Right.
interest or affinity with. I mean, law was not completely out of the realm of a way to work on social problems, which is what
Right.
I was interested in. So I do think you keep coming back to sort of your core values.
Right.
Man, there's my mother's voice coming out of my mouth. But I do think there is such a thing as sort of like what really drives you. And
Yeah.
again, sometimes it's hard to know that in abstract. But if you kind of don't stray too far from what is true there, then you probably will turn out okay. And for
Yeah.
me, law school was well, we can talk more about that, but I can see it could have just as easily gone another way, but it wasn't a terrible place for me to end up.
Right. I really like the analogy of sort of like the sort of like main line, and then you kind of oscillating around it. That's a very good image. Very.
I think
very...
you just came up with that one, so you get credit for that one.
Oh no, I didn't. You I just imagine things visually. But law school. You moved to New York City, which sounds amazing. I mean, that in and of itself sounds like a massive achievement to me. I'd love to move to New York someday. Is it as good as it's?
Apply to graduate school. That's the way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. So New York, some people love it, some people hate it. How do you feel about it?
I loved it. I moved to New York in 2002. So again, less than a year after September 11th. And there was really this feel of like being part, like not being afraid to do that and being a part of helping kind of rebuild the city. But it was also like, just to be really graphic, like there was a smell downtown of like burning that just was there for a year. I mean, it was very much a city. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
One of my summer jobs when I was a law student was at the Legal Aid Society, and their offices were downtown. And one of the things we did was sort through papers, because there were the buildings that crumbled and there were the buildings around them, and most of them had their windows blown in, and they too had to be evacuated and demolished. And people, I guess, in hazard suits had just gone in and boxed up everything. And so 2 years later, you would open a box of paper and just get hit with this like burned smell. So it was this very visceral place to be. By the same token, I think New York, I always say New York is a place that's best experienced either as a completely broke ass student, which I was, or someone very rich, because
heard that one before. Yeah.
Yeah. In between, it's hard to do. I mean, as a student, we had subsidized housing. Like you didn't mind, you can eat cheap in New York. I mean, rent is expensive, but food is cheap. You have a student card, so you can go to museums for free. I remember very hoity-toity, you could get tickets to the Metropolitan Opera the day of with a student pass for $25, and they would give you whatever was left. So my friends and I would go to the opera and sit in like box seats because nobody had bought them that day. So I got exposed to all these cultural things. And I think you either love it or hate it. I love New York. I love public transportation. I love people from everywhere. I loved how in your face everybody was, how like people are really gruff, but they're also really kind. So if you stand on a street corner in New York and ask for directions, 10 people will be arguing about the best way to get you there. I just loved it. And yeah, it was great. It was great. I have nothing bad to say about that about living in New York City.
Great.
Law school I have pros and cons about, but
okay, well that's probably a good next step to talk about. You went to which law school?
I went to Columbia University Law School.
And tell us a little bit about that journey, like from start to finish, your interests while you were doing that professionally.
Yeah. Well, I had applied, like I said, to 3 law schools in New York. And my attitude was, if I don't get into one of these law schools in New York, then I will not go to law school. I'll just look for another job. So I applied to NYU, Columbia, and Fordham, all really good law schools. And I had good grades from undergrad. I mean, it's not accidental that I'm still in academia. Like university is something I have done well. And I had also a big factor, I think that's reality. I had a full scholarship to undergrad, so I did not have to pay to go to undergrad. So I had some money saved, and my parents had some money saved that they could help me with law school, which otherwise is extremely expensive.
Yeah.
So that's a real position of economic privilege. That being said, I had looked at those law schools and seen what public interest programs they had. So
Hmm.
public interest is basically like anything other than going to a big corporate law firm when you graduate.
Hmm.
And both NYU and Columbia had programs that would help pay your loans back if you worked in a nonprofit or in government or something
Interesting.
afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah. And I definitely went into law school knowing I didn't know exactly what I was going to do on the other side, but I knew it was not going to be a big corporate law firm.
Did you ever get
Um,
tempted? Was
no.
there ever a moment when you saw someone roll up in like this car and you were just kind of thinking like, well, this person will never have to worry about money ever again. They could take vacations, eat whatever the heck they want.
Yeah, and let me correct myself. I
Hmm.
worked at a law firm for 2 years after
Hmm.
I was a public defender because I was broke and um, unhappy, and I can talk about that. And
Hmm.
the like metaphor is I couldn't take my cat to the vet and buy new contact lenses in the same month, and I was 32 years old, and I was like, this is not
Yeah.
sustainable.
Yeah.
So that's the back end. But going into the front, I think again it goes to this fact that I have really strong opinions, um, and I'm trying to think of a good adjective. I have a hard time working when I'm not intrinsically motivated.
Right.
And so I think I knew from the beginning that I would not do very well working just because I was getting paid for it. And that if somebody told me to review a stack of documents about a merger between two companies that I didn't care about, I would have a really hard time getting through that day. So in that way, I wasn't tempted. Again, I'm very fortunate. I don't come from a wealthy background, but I also didn't have to help my parents financially. If that had been the case, I think the money would have been a bigger deal. There are lots of reasons that people need to earn a lot of money, and I was lucky enough that I didn't have to decide based on financial concerns. That being said, it was the summers, and the summers in New York, they try to woo you. And my friends who I worked at legal aid in the summers, and I worked at a public defender office in the summers, and I had really fun, wonderful summers. And then my law firm friends would take me like as a plus one when they got free theater tickets or they got to take a date to a fancy dinner and they didn't have anybody. So I did get to enjoy some of the peripheral luxuries.
Right, because they pay really well, these summer internships at the law firms, right?
They do. I mean, again, this was like I went to law school between 2002 and 2005, and that was before the financial crisis. So again, there are lots of like background. So, and I went to a fancy law school. So I think people could make, I don't know, if fact check me on this, people of law, I feel like you could make between $10,000 and $20,000 in a summer.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I think that's the number.
Yeah.
And I went to schools that had good public interest programs, so they would give you stipends to work at nonprofits in the summer. But it was like, I think it was maybe like $2,000 or something. Like you could cover your rent basically for the summer, and get experience and that kind of thing.
Right. It's a different
so
ballpark
that's why I picked
financially.
Columbia. Yeah. So to go back to why I picked Columbia, I got a little scholarship to go there, so that tilted it.
Yeah.
And because they were both good schools, I think it was like easier to find housing near Columbia because it was uptown and NYU was in the Village. And I think those were like which sounds like a stupid reason, but really like once you get to it.
Is the degree of name recognition that here in Europe we kind of attribute to places like Columbia, Harvard, Yale, is that actually as much of a factor as it looks like from here in Europe?
I think so. I think I'm not happy to say that. I don't think that's a good thing. I think you could get a fantastic education at a law school that no one has heard of. But I also think there's no question that name recognition makes it easier to get jobs in the US. I don't think that's a good thing. But I think that's the way it is. And I got my job at the University of Amsterdam in 2011 because they had a connection with Columbia and somebody knew somebody and they looked at my CV. I mean, maybe they would have done it otherwise, but I don't know that experience. I only know the experience that I have.
Yeah, I ask because it certainly is something that's on students and alumni's minds. It's definitely something that people look into. I personally did my master's degree at the University of Amsterdam, which is a fine university, as we both know. But I also have friends who are doing it at Oxford, LSE, can't really think of anyone who went to the US for one, but
It's
the
too
point,
expensive. I wouldn't go to the US as a European graduate student, frankly.
unless you
It's
get
not
a
worth it.
full ride.
Exactly.
A friend of mine, and I think you know him as well, is considering going to the new school right now. So he's getting a scholarship. So I think there are like certain situations where it possibly makes sense, but um, I guess what I'm trying to get at is it is a recurring question on
Yeah.
people's minds. Is it worth it investing more money going to one of these schools?
I mean, there aren't easy answers, right? Because
Yeah,
go back to our first point that you don't know what your life is going to bring you.
right.
So I would like to say, well, think about what you want out of your education. Like if you know that you want to um, stay in the Netherlands, for example, then any school in the Netherlands is going to be a perfectly fine place for you to work.
Yeah,
Probably that's also true within Western Europe. If you think you want to go to Korea, like we were talking about before you started recording,
yeah,
then maybe you need a school with a bigger international profile. By the same token, it's hard to know what you're going to want down the road. So,
for sure.
I mean, I think like very American advice is to go to the best, but I think
Mm-hmm.
that means most name recognized
Mm,
school that you can afford.
yeah,
And that you can afford is like a big asterisk
yeah,
because you have to pay those loans back. And
right.
so that again is a very real consideration, which I think in my position as a half European passport holder with an American background, let's put it that way, I think I like the education style in the US better.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot more freedom. I think there's a lot more chance to explore and change your major and take random classes in history, even though you're majoring in economics. However, the cost is prohibitive.
Mm,
And I would love to see a system that cost what you pay in Europe and gave you the freedom and flexibility that you
yeah,
get in the United States.
yeah.
I actually do think it's possible, but I haven't yet seen it
I think so
exist.
too. I'm German. I
Yeah,
have
I
never
know.
understood why there isn't something like PPLE, like something that it gives you a little bit more freedom, but even more freedom than that, because even in PPLE, I mean, you take two classes in each of the subjects. If you specialize, even then you take 4 classes. As a political science major, I never took a single class because there wasn't one on a particular issue. I know that a lot of my friends who go to college in the US or who went to college in the US could study sort of like the geopolitics of the Sahel or something like
Yeah,
that. Something that
yeah.
like really already primes you
Or
for
let's pick
some,
it up, any history class,
yeah,
right? Any history
any
class.
history class. Doesn't exist.
No,
And
no.
it's also sometimes difficult to take classes at the other faculties. Sometimes
Yeah,
it's not allowed because only people who are in the history faculty can take them. Language, of course, is an issue, something that we put on ourselves, of course, by coming here. I think there's a degree of, you can expect not everything to be in English when you come here as an international student. The fact that it's happening in English in the first place, I think, is a kind of a crazy thing. Cool,
yeah.
but I mean, crazy that it's happening. But yeah, I agree. I do think there could be a ton of innovation in higher education, specifically in countries like Germany, where you have free education, you have so that this base level is established, but there just doesn't seem to be these places where you can really do something very specific, where you really set yourself up. If you really know what you want to do, or even if you don't, but if you just want to explore more, it doesn't exist because you know this, but perhaps the viewers don't. In Europe, in most places, I can't really think of, maybe England, you don't do it, but you really declare your major as you enter college. While
Yeah.
as in the US, that doesn't really happen like that.
Well, there are some. I have a younger brother who's a finance guy, and
Mm-hmm.
he went to the University of Florida and chose finance or economics, or not
Okay.
economics, but something like business very early on. And I don't think
Mm-hmm.
ever took a poetry or a history course
Right.
either. I think you can choose that. Um, but I do think, and yeah, I think it depends on the school. I think there's
Yeah.
more variety.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a whole nother conversation
Yeah,
about,
that's true.
excuse me, the design of higher education.
Sure. But we can also go back to law school because we're still
Sure.
kind of
Yes.
we just went on a
Yes.
big rabbit hole from the law school. But
Yeah.
you go to law school. You kind of go in this public interest.
Well, let me interrupt because it's
Yeah.
not irrelevant to the conversation we were just having about university. So,
Yeah.
indeed, I don't know who's watching, but in the U.S., there's no undergraduate degree in law.
Mm-hmm.
So, I had a 4-year degree in political science, and
Mm-hmm.
then law is a graduate degree of 3 years. And I think that's relevant because a law degree in the U.S. is very much Well, it's a debate between whether it's an academic degree or a professional
Mm-hmm.
degree, because it really is teaching you like how to find and apply the law, how to find and apply the law, and on the edges to think critically about it or do. But it's designed that you will become a practicing lawyer or
Right.
judge at the end of it. That makes sense to me as a graduate degree. You've had an undergraduate degree that like broadened your perspective, and now you are taking that broad perspective in political science or history or philosophy. Or I even had law school classmates who were music majors.
Mm-hmm.
I think law schools actually secretly loved to have people with a random art
Oh,
history
yeah.
degree or music major. Now you're going to learn how to take this broad base of knowledge and apply it
Mm.
within the legal field. So I think, that being said, law school for me was at times frustrating because I was interested in justice,
Mm-hmm.
and the law doesn't always afford justice. Like the
Right.
law teaches how to apply the law. So in that way, depending on the professor and depending on kind of the tone they took, I was either, alternatively like frustrated and fired up and angry,
Yeah.
or really appreciating it. But for all my critique of like, Ivy League is expensive and you could get a great education somewhere else, I had fantastic professors. I mean, I really had great teachers at Columbia, and they taught. They were certainly publishing and doing brilliant things, but they had office hours and they stayed after class and they,
Right.
had conversations with us, and they were accessible. And I think that was something I tried to bring to the UFA as a teacher,
Yes.
but something I don't know is normal in sort of like, let me not be offensive. I think mainstream legal education in Europe is more
Yeah.
big lecture,
For sure.
transmit information, take the exam. And while there were big classes and I had to take exams, I felt like there was a lot more interaction with the teachers.
Yeah.
Um,
And this is definitely something that I can confirm. My sister just actually finished taking the state exam for being a lawyer in Germany, and I don't think she ever had any classes that were in classes smaller than 30 people. The tutorials, which happen like I think a couple times a month, are sort of just you discuss some cases, but it's very removed, and this is sort of like the equivalent of grad school, right? So
mhm.
it really is true that legal education in Europe is not structured like that, and I think that's to the detriment of lawyers' education here.
I think law schools are trying to change it. I mean, I'm definitely part of a lot of conversations, but then you're talking about like honors programs within law schools or graduate programs. But I think, I think there's a lot of change going on, but I think the mainstream is coming from a place where it's not expected
Yeah.
that there will be a lot of discussion.
Mm-hmm. But you sort of took advantage of this at Columbia, and you finish in, how long does it take? 3 years.
It's a 3-year program.
It's
Yeah.
a 3-year program.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think, again, there was what I did in class, but there was what I did outside of class. So
Yeah.
what I did outside of class was take advantage of legal organizations in New York that were doing the kind of work that I wanted to do. And it's three years, 2 summers sandwiched in the middle. So one summer I worked at the Prisoners' Rights Project of the New York Legal Aid Society. And the summer after, I worked at the Neighborhood Defender Service of Harlem, which was a public defender organization. And both of those summers, I spent a lot of time at Rikers Island, which is the New York City jail facility, which they are now in the process of shutting down because it's hell on earth. And I think, again, this is becoming an interview about smells. You walk into a place like Rikers Island and you have to shower and wash your clothes afterwards because it's disgusting. Like, it smells. People are not treated humanely. And yeah, I can say more about that, but I think it's hard to overstate the impact of just being in those jails and talking to people and seeing how they were treated. I was politicized before that about issues of race and crime. Like, it wasn't like that was the first time I was like, wow, the US justice system is pretty racist. Who'd have thought? Exactly. Like, no, I was intellectually aware before that time, but I think seeing how people treat other human beings in the context of the criminal justice system was a radicalizing experience for me.
Right. And that makes a lot of sense. I've watched Louis Theroux going into American prisons. I
love and hate that show. I've been in those jails. He's gone to jails that I've been in. Yes.
Really? actually.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, he has one. There's one that's on. I also was a public defender in Miami, and there's
Mm,
one where he goes to Metro West, which is one of the Miami
mm,
jails. And
mm.
yeah, anyway, that's another. I think sometimes those shows glorify. I think sometimes they dehumanize the people who are in prisons and jails as much as they bring attention to the dehumanizing
Interesting.
conditions.
How so? I know this isn't talk about sort of the prison system, but I find this very interesting. In what way?
Well, now I haven't recently watched a Louis Theroux show,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
I can't say I will not I will not take on Louis Theroux and the auspices of the internet. But I think sometimes it just depends on how it's done. Like I
Hmm.
think it's very easy. I think jails and prisons are dehumanizing places, and they're
Yeah.
designed that way. And they put everybody in the same clothes. They put them in cages. They put them behind bars, and there is like this kind of cognitive thing that happens where you have to separate who I am from who they are in order to make sense that this is an okay thing that's happening.
Mm.
And I think that maybe what a lot of people do is they convince themselves that there's something fundamentally different about the people behind those bars. Now, that also gets wrapped up into race and class and gender. That makes it okay to keep them in conditions like that. And I think sometimes TV shows, which are like America's toughest prisons, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times the story there is like because the people behind these bars are so depraved,
Mm.
and it's like no, it's because you know people broke a law. You don't
Yeah.
know what law people broke to get in there, but the system, like these institutions, are set up and maintained by the government and taxpayers and voters, and that's criminal.
Mm.
I can go
Yeah.
way on about that, but that's a
Yes.
glimpse.
Yes, for sure. The one thing I'll say, there is a show on Netflix, and it has a much more dramatic title and much more dramatic editing than it actually is, in my opinion. It's called. It is actually called The World's Toughest Prisons, but it is done by a British guy who was actually in jail for 12 years. He was convicted of a murder he didn't commit. He ended up overturning it, and he is now doing this. And he's actually going to a huge array of prisons. So he's going to Greenland. He's going to Germany, looking at like a ton of different so it seems like a show that isn't just out for like the
Okay,
world's worst. And
all right. You might have
because he
changed
was
my
a
Netflix queue.
because he's a prisoner, or he was a prisoner, he definitely asks questions that I, as someone who's never been to prison, even just for a visit, or temporarily, I kind of feel like these are the questions that I guess I would want to hear.
Mm,
They seem a lot more in depth than, so why are you a killer? Like, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, it really seems a lot more, yeah, it can be tough, right? Like, I understand it. I have experienced violence. I've, been violent, the host, not me. So the way that
you're
he
young
phrases it.
yet.
Yeah. So, but just that much on prison.
Yeah.
But
No, and
yeah.
I do actually think it's interesting. I think public perception is changing. I think there's been so much more mainstream attention brought to the injustice of certainly American criminal justice, but also now starting to explore outside. I will definitely say that. I think when I first started, again, I guess the summer of 2003 was the first summer I worked for prisoners' rights. It was
Mm,
very much like, are you safe? Like,
right.
where do you sit in the room with those people?
Yeah.
And now it's much more, um, even from people like old white people my parents'
Mm,
age, they're much more likely to be aware of the fact that
right.
there's a lot more complexity to it than that.
Right. Right. Fascinating topic. Would be an interesting thing to keep talking
Not
about
what you
for an
want to talk
hour.
about. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I guess so. We've already talked about law school, sort of like the academic institution of it, what it's there for, what it's supposed to do. We've also talked a bit about what you were doing outside of it. So while you were living in New York, going to law school, how did that combine into sort of like what you ended up later on?
Yeah.
You were mentioning earlier factors that you can't really predict, meeting people, moving continents. What can you say about sort of the time period after law school?
Yeah, well, this is a much easier like more typical story.
Yeah.
I mean, I had gotten involved in prisons and jails and criminal law and criminal justice, and so I wanted to be a public defender when I graduated from law school. And because I went to a good school and I had the privilege, public defenders are free lawyers for people who are accused of crimes. There are public defender offices in every county in the United States. There are, let me not even say good ones and bad ones. There are ones that you would want to work at, and there are ones that
Hmm.
you would not want to work at. Um, And so there were maybe 4 or 5 that I really wanted to work at, and I applied to them, and I got a job in Miami, which is where I grew up. And I went there, right after law school, and I was also, okay, frankly, full disclosure, I was also dating someone who also got a job there who was not
Right.
from Miami. So that was
Okay.
nice that we both got a job at the same place. The relationship didn't last, but it ended up being a great place to be an early lawyer, because they were very focused on trials and training.
Hmm.
It was a big office that like prided themselves on training good trial lawyers. And as much critique as we can, there are a lot of critiques about being a criminal defense lawyer. You're not changing the system, right? You are in the system. Maybe that's part of the conversation about why I'm no longer a criminal defense lawyer. But when you're in it, when you're doing it, you want to do it the best that you can. And that involves going to trial and being willing to fight for your clients and knowing that you can do it and doing it the best way that you can. And Miami was really good at that. And it was nice to go back to where I was from and feel like maybe I was contributing to my own community in that way.
Mm-hmm. And you stayed in Miami how long doing that job?
I was in Miami. So I graduated in 2005 and I started work, like the next month. I think I tried my first case and I graduated in May. No, a little bit of a break because I had to take the bar exam, but
all right.
You graduate in May, you take the bar exam in July, and I started working August 1st, I think.
Wow.
And I tried my first case in October. So it was like bang, bang, bang. And I really liked it. I mean, there are frustrations. But then I still love New York, and I think I still considered myself a New Yorker, and I really missed New York. And one of the places that I had worked as an intern when I was graduating, they just didn't have the money to hire me. I mean, that's part of working at nonprofits. They just don't, the places you want to work can't always hire you, even if they want to.
Yeah.
And I had been in Miami and things were going well. I guess it was about 2 years. I got a call from the Neighborhood Defender Service of Harlem, where I had basically like spent all the hours I could afford to spend while I was in law school. And they said, we've got money for a new position. Do you want it? And I was like, that was a tough decision, to be honest, because I think that was a really tough decision. That's one of those moments that could have gone either way, and life would have turned out completely different.
Wow.
And at the time, both would have been very sound career decisions. In Miami, they liked me. I liked them. I was advancing, getting more complicated cases, getting like in a good path to sort of continue to be challenged and developed. I had I had good friends. I mean, life was good. I also had a lot of good friends in New York. And I think I maybe thought of myself more as a New Yorker, even though I'd grown up in Miami. So it was just was a toss up. And I think there was a bit of me that was like, I had broken up with the boyfriend that had lent me to Miami.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, I think I want to go back to New York. And so I had been in Miami 2.5 years, and I went back and I took a job at the Neighborhood Defender Service. And I think that, which remained a great organization. It was a public defender office located in Harlem that served the Harlem community, very much tied into, but had a lot fewer resources than the Miami Public Defender's Office had. Trying cases in Manhattan was very different than trying cases in Miami for a lot of specific reasons. Cases went to trial less. It was a different style of working. And even though I had loved being there as a student, I found it a lot more. I was not as happy as I thought I would be when I went back. So I don't know if there's a lesson there or that's just me. But I was there about a year, and I guess that's what I alluded to earlier. I was working really hard. I have since read articles about this. I think I was really ground down by how unfair everything was for my clients, like how I could do the best and just do all this work, and just my clients just kept getting effed.
I remember you mentioning this years ago.
Yeah. And I don't look, there are people who are really amazing public defenders for 30 years and who do a great job. And I have so much respect for those people. And I think for me, it was just like a perfect storm of feeling worn down by that, feeling financially stressed because and again, I'm like my parents would have lent me money, but I was like in my 30s. I didn't want to borrow money from my parents. I didn't know, this is about like takeaway lessons. I didn't know how to advocate for myself as an employee. Like I think if I could talk to my 30-year-old self then, I would have been
Mhm.
like, go talk to your supervisor and say that this is what you need to do a better job, or like this
Mhm.
is what you need to feel like you're living up to your potential, or those kinds of things. But I didn't know how to do that, and I didn't know that that was a thing you could do. And
Yeah.
so I just thought, well, I'm unhappy, I'll switch jobs.
Right.
And because I didn't talk about why I was unhappy, I didn't get a lot of advice on what other jobs were possible. And so what happened was, a friend was like, hey, I know a former public defender who worked at this law firm, this private criminal law firm,
Mhm.
for a couple years and saved up a bunch of money and is now going back to being a public defender. Maybe that would be a good thing for you. So I applied for that job and I got it. And I
Mhm.
spent 2 years working on Park Avenue, literally,
Mhm.
for what's called a white collar criminal
Oh.
defense firm, which is
Oh.
very,
Okay.
so like blue collar is poor people and white
Mhm.
collar is rich people, because I
Mhm.
think you wear a white collar if you
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, but basically then I was defending people who were accused of like insider trading
Mhm.
and being investigated by the SEC. um, then we also did some pro bono drug cases, but those were very different kind of cases.
Right.
And indeed I earned more money than I had ever earned in my life and
Right.
have earned since. It was
Yeah.
like my
But
2
it
years
must.
of peak
Yeah.
income.
But it must have been a crazy switch that sort of happened in the way that you approach work, or is that just kind of how it sounds? Because to me it sounds like first you're sort of defending low income people
Yeah.
who really who really need it because they have no other options, and then you go to like people who have possibly defrauded people, and you
Yes,
defend them.
yes, yes. And that was, well, there are two sides to it. I think one thing that it's important, the nice lesson, right? If you
Hmm.
like that, we're looking for lessons,
Yeah.
is that things are always more complex than they appear from the outside. So I had really lovely colleagues, right? They were really, and we shared. Um, Now my colleagues were from much wealthier backgrounds than my public defender colleagues had been.
Hmm.
Most of them had gone to Ivy League schools. Most of them had lived in New York for long periods of time. Um, but they shared a critique of the criminal justice system that certainly was
Hmm.
in line. I think there's a defense attorney personality,
Hmm.
whether you're defending poor people or
Right.
rich people, where you just accept that just because someone is arrested and accused of something
Yeah.
doesn't mean that they belong in
Yeah.
prison.
Yeah.
And then you can sort of work backwards, right? Either
Yeah.
because they haven't done what they're accused of, or because they have done what they're accused of, but it wasn't as bad as the
As a
state
law
saying it,
says it was. Yeah.
or they've done exactly what they did. They should go to jail, but the constitutional process is really important. Like there's a whole sort of continuum of how you might feel about a particular client. By the same token, I still liked most of my clients. Like I am a people oriented person.
Hmm.
I liked most of my clients when they didn't have a lot of money. I liked most of my clients when they did have a lot of money.
Do you remember a client you despised, and you were like, "Oh my god, I have to defend this guy"?
Well, there was one public defender client with whom I just never really clicked.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say despised. I would
Hmm.
say she never trusted me, and
Mm.
I never we did not have an open
Mm.
communicative relationship, and as a result it was not a good um, well, not as a result, but also it was not a good result
Mhm.
um, for anyone. um, and there are a lot of reasons there. I sometimes, when I was representing people at the law firm, I sometimes would get frustrated because we would, someone would the prosecution would be offering. There's also a lot of negotiating. There was very little going to trial with rich people. Rich people
Mm.
don't want to take the risk. They want to
Mm.
negotiate
Mm.
something. And when it's insider trading, frankly, by the time you get arrested for insider trading, they have so much evidence. It's very hard to go to trial because
Okay.
it's on paper. Like
Right. Right.
there's very little doubt in a lot of those cases.
Mm.
Whereas if somebody is accused of selling drugs on the street, there's a lot of doubt about what
Right.
actually saw, about what was actually handed over, about, their doubt is what you're talking about when you're talking about a criminal conviction. So we would negotiate a plea deal that was, let's say, like 3 months when the prosecution had been offering 4 years or something like that.
Mm.
And there was always a little bit of you that wanted your client to be like, wow, thanks, Alison, 3 months, that's a great deal. And instead it was always like, I have to go to jail for 3 months, which that's a terrible thing. Like I didn't want to go to jail for 3
Yeah.
months. So I'm not being unsympathetic. But there would be a bit of me sometimes that was like, do you know, like I represented 20-year-old kids who are doing 15 years for selling a piece of crack that somebody
Yeah.
else wanted.
Mm.
Like, and you're doing 3 months for defrauding, whatever, like,
Mm.
perspective. But that wasn't really my job. And
Mm.
I think it was easier to sleep because I was less worried about how my clients would come out on the other side of it.
Right. Right.
And I think it's easier to talk about my favorite clients. Like, I had
Mm-hmm.
a law firm client who um, was involved in some fraud. I can't even remember the details, to be honest. Like, those details don't stick with me. And he went to prison for a couple months, to federal prison, and called me when he got out and was like, I am so open to how much better my situation was than these other kids who were in there
Mm.
for selling drugs.
Mm.
And I am really, like, he just really kind of had this. He was a very religious man to begin with, but he had kind of like a political social awakening
Right.
in prison. And so, like, those stories also happened.
Sure.
Um, I mean, I tell my 4-year-old that there are no good people and bad people. There are just
Mm-hmm.
things that people do.
Mm.
And most of us have done things that we wish we hadn't done. And most of us tried to do better things. And I think that's a really core value if you're going to do criminal defense, because you have to believe that people are not the worst thing that they've ever done. And I really do believe that, whether they're rich people or poor people. Um, there was one case that I can't go into detail about, but it was about doing some investigation before someone had been arrested about investing in the developing world. And I was like, I'm not comfortable with this. I don't
Mm.
want to be a part of this.
Mm.
And my colleagues were like, okay, we'll put somebody else on the case.
Mm.
So in that way, that was easy to do. But again, to continue the train, like, after 2
Yeah.
years, I had sort of built up a bit of savings account. I felt like I could breathe a little bit easier. And I was looking for something different because it didn't feel, well, it felt like I had strayed too far
Mm-hmm. From your
from
line.
what motivated me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not that I felt like I was doing bad things or that my colleagues weren't good people, but it just was not me.
Yeah.
Like, it just wasn't me.
I can. Yeah. I empathize.
Yeah. And so I had been looking for something else. And again, I still wasn't good at going to my bosses and being like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not personal. It's just not, it's just not me. And I didn't want to get fired before I had something else. I don't think they would have done that. And while I was in this place of like, what am I going to do next? I thought, well, I have a savings account for the first time in my adult life. Like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I'll just take 6 months off and travel. And while I was thinking about that, I met this Dutch guy at a wedding and
Mm-hmm.
was like, okay, well, instead of going and traveling in Spain, I speak Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
So I did criminal defense work in Miami and New York.
Right.
I lived in Miami and New York. It's not the criminal defense. Maybe I'll go to Spain and like teach English for 6 months. It was
Right.
like, well, maybe I'll come to Amsterdam and we'll see how that goes. And 10 years and 2 kids and a house later, that's how it went. And you want me to keep going or just pause? Like, that's a.
I mean, that's obviously like a big step. I mean, you're crossing continents,
Yeah.
you're living abroad for the first time. A significant other is involved in that whole. It seems like a lot is happening in that time period, right?
Yeah, but at the same token, I think it also is an example of why timing matters.
Mm-hmm.
I actually joke, like, my now husband is a friend of my younger brother's. That's how we met. And we
Right.
met in New York in 2004. I thought he was cute. I don't know what he thinks about me. I hope he thought I was cute, but I wasn't really in the space where I was like,
Yeah.
open to that relationship, and nor was he in the space where he was open to that with me, and we just didn't connect that way. When I met him in 2010, I was already clicked towards being willing to move,
Right.
being willing to do something new.
Right.
And so the timing worked. And on the one hand, it's like, I've had people say, wow, it was so brave to like leave everything and move to the Netherlands. And I'm like, no, I didn't. That's not how I came here. I came here very much. My employers at the law firm were like, oh, you're in love. That's wonderful. Like, just take a leave of absence. Like, go for 6 months. And if you want to come back, come back. I think they very kindly were like, if it doesn't work
Wow.
out with this random Dutch guy, like,
Yeah.
come back and we'll give you your job back. So like, I left with this safety net.
Mm-hmm.
And I left thinking, if it doesn't work out, I go teach English in Spain for 6 months and
Yeah.
figure out what I'm going to do. So on that level, it was easy in the beginning. I think the harder part was then a year in, where I was like, okay, now I want to stay here.
Mm-hmm.
Now what?
Right.
Because how do you transfer what is a very American
Yeah.
career
Oh yeah.
to Europe. And again, through connections I had from Colombia, I worked
Mm-hmm.
briefly at the Special Court for Sierra Leone,
Mm-hmm.
not as a defense attorney. I worked for the court itself.
Mm-hmm.
Very educational. But my motivation to defend people accused of crimes in the US was not the same motivation for defending people accused of war crimes and human
War
rights
crime.
violations
Yeah.
at the national
I
level.
can imagine.
Even though there's some of the same logic, right?
Yeah.
Like, people are not the worst thing they've ever done. People need good defense. I just didn't quite have the same skin in the game, I guess. That's not the right word, but I didn't.
No, but I understand what you mean.
I didn't have the same
perhaps
political motivations.
right.
And then I'd always liked teaching, and I got offered a chance to teach for free at a summer program at the UFA. That's the other
Okay.
good lesson.
Okay.
Sometimes you take any opportunity that comes. So I taught a summer program for free in the summer of 2011, which was a Columbia Amsterdam summer program.
Okay.
And I taught mock trial. Like, that was easy to teach, right? I had been doing that professionally.
Yeah.
And Marjolein Ziyech at the UFA liked me. And in the spring of that year, so like we're talking about a good solid year of unemployment.
Right.
Unpaid unemployment, because it's not like I had that, but I had a savings account because I worked at the law firm. She said, we need somebody to teach legal English at the law school. Can you teach legal English? And I said yes, because I'm not doing anything else. And that sort of grew into PPLE, and then grew into a PhD.
Wow. I mean, now we're covering like 10 years or like
basically
10 years.
That's the last 10 years. That's literally
But that is obviously a very good section that we can like zoom into a little bit more. But so new continent, new job. All of a sudden, you find yourself in academia. Is academia something that so far I had never, like in the past, like in this conversation so far, I haven't really heard
in the 10 years prior.
Yeah, exactly. There hasn't really been ever a moment where I was like, oh, I can really sense that there's like this want to go back into academia. Is that something? And we've already talked about how some things are very coincidental. Is that something where when you saw the opportunity, you were like, hey, actually, I really do feel connected to academia in a way? Or was it like, well, I guess it's academia now?
Yeah, well, actually, we have to go back 20 years now, I guess. Yeah, because when I was a student activist, the mission of the organization I worked for was access to higher education. So it is like very much, I think university education has always been part of like that core belief that university education is the means by which people can transform their lives, both financially and personally. Because university education tends to be the financial switch for a lot of people between and like access to political power and all those other things. Again, it's not the world I want, but it's the world that we live in where that tends to be a real barrier for people. So universities had always really interested me, like as a place of social transformation. That sounds way too fancy, but I really loved my time as a student and my time working with students. I also really like teaching as an activity. I come from a long line of teachers, my mom, my aunts, and I had always really enjoyed like training interns when I was a lawyer. So the activity, and I actually think teaching is a lot like trial lawyering. Like you have well, these are just so there's like the values of what you do, right? And then there's what you actually physically do. So you go into a courtroom and it's a performance. Like I think any good lawyer has a little bit of actor in them.
Right.
And I think a teacher has to as well. It's a performance.
Yeah.
And I like performing. Like it gives me energy.
Right.
It's an interaction. You don't exactly know how things are going to go. It's like a little bit.
It's kind of exhilarating, right?
It's like, a lot exhilarating. You're about to start teaching. I'm excited for you. Like
I have already taught at the political science department. I'm now teaching at the PPLE college, but I really like it. Like it really feels like it does feel like a performance, and it you know you're interacting, you're trying things out. You have to think quick on your feet. It's very similar also to interviewing in a way, because really it's interaction. I mean, if this can be described as anything, if there's any sort of umbrella term for teaching, interviewing, all of that stuff. It's interaction. Like you're basically
Yeah.
you're
And I think
taking
that's
data
even
and you're
better. That's
combining
even
it.
better than performance, because you have to, if you're a good teacher and a good lawyer for that matter,
Mhm.
you have to be receiving
Mhm.
as much as you're giving. Because if you're just performing,
Yeah.
well, I'm not an actual actor. I'm sure actual actors would say that there is an interaction happening there as well.
Right.
That it's not just output. But yeah, that's it. Like I get a ton of energy from it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's fun. And I
Yeah.
actually
Right.
think that's a word we haven't used yet in this conversation, but
Mhm.
like I really need to find what I'm doing fun.
Mm.
And I think it's a privilege and a luxury to be able to do work that is fun.
For sure.
Um, and I have always felt like it would really be like spitting in the face of the privilege and opportunity that I have, like not to appreciate and enjoy
Right.
the work that I can
Yeah.
do. So I feel so lucky to be able to do work that I think is fun.
Yeah. Though
Um,
on the other side of that coin, and I'm saying this perhaps a little bit for controversy's sake,
sure.
it is a privilege on one hand, but I also think it's a choice. I also think it's possible to go through life not having fun in work simply because one doesn't put the effort into finding what's fun. Um,
Yeah, well, I think it depends on who you're talking about. I mean, I think
of
there are a
course,
lot of
of
people like
course.
working in the Amazon warehouses who may or may not think that it's fun.
No, and this is obviously
Um,
not who I'm talking about, but
yeah,
this could be specifically people who come from let's say a wealthy background, white skin, possibly male, and people who just don't prioritize that, who prioritize money. Um,
I don't think we're taught to prioritize that. I mean,
yeah,
I think we are taught to indeed like, and I think well, I keep coming back to my own parents who like very well meaning were like, we really hope that our child can get to a position where she's
yeah,
able to financially support herself. I think that's understandable.
yeah,
Um, I think again, let me go to the people that maybe you're talking about, and I won't just put it on race and gender and economics, but um, I think in academia, even in undergrad, in like competitive undergrad, like PPLE was, there's this idea that if you're having fun, you're not working hard enough.
yeah,
But I think you can work really hard at things that are also fun.
yeah,
Um, and maybe I'm using fun to mean things that give you energy,
yeah,
um, because I certainly think that's a big part of it.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so yeah, so that's why coming back to university was like always kind of in the back of my head, to be honest.
Right.
I think I always thought I knew being a public defender would not be something I would do forever, because that I knew at a certain level for me, I knew I would get burned out of just
Mm,
cycling people through the system. Like
right.
even I used to say the criminal justice system is a sledgehammer, and I'm just trying to like be the cushion, like throw myself between the sledgehammer and
Mm,
the person. And that I knew that wasn't going to be
mm,
something I could do forever. So whether it meant I would go into like criminal justice policy or back
right.
to advocacy, I knew I wanted to be in the courtroom so that I could have a realistic knowledge of what it was like
Mm.
and then work on changing it.
Which is
Um,
interesting because if we go back to the initial analogy that you were mentioning earlier, that sort of defining point in your second year of undergrad where you were on that side and rather than that side, right? It really does seem like the lawyer position was sort of the intermediary step because perhaps from the perspective of, sophomore Allison in undergrad, being a lawyer is sort of like being in that system, but the next step then really is saying no, I actually find the policy and like the underlying factors even more compelling than being part of the machinery.
I think that's really true. I think especially if you grow up watching American law television or movies,
Yeah,
you think that lawyers are agents for change.
right.
And then the more you get into it, there are certainly people who have been lawyers who have also been agents for change.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, lawyers like to say Gandhi was a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
but he didn't make change lawyering.
Right,
Right? Like he
right.
made change. Not that I'm comparing myself to Gandhi at all,
Yeah.
but the
I didn't think
stories
you
you
were.
hear. No, no, no. I mean, the stories you hear about people who were lawyers who were also like leaders of social movements they tend to have made that change, not lawyering. Um, and now and there's a whole. I'm looking at my bookshelf like off screen, and there's
Mm-hmm.
a whole realm of legal theory which is
Yeah.
about like the potential and limitations of law for
Mm-hmm.
social change.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, law is essentially about maintaining the rules as they exist
Mm.
and operating within them. So that's just not
Right.
set up that way. So yeah, no, I think I always had an awareness of that, and I went into public defense very much with eyes open to that.
Mm.
Whereas I think education, and I won't just say academia. I'm gonna be a lawyer and quibble with the words education
Mm-hmm.
versus academia.
Sure.
I think for me, education is a place I always knew that I wanted to be, and is still a place I think I want to stay. Um, I think now in my like third career as a PhD student,
Yeah.
I'm still not quite sure. I have another 4 years of this project to figure it out.
Yeah.
Which part of education I want to use this PhD for?
Right.
Um, whether because I think academia is very much research and writing and publishing, and very often, not exclusively, but very often the audience is other academics.
Mm-hmm.
And education, I think, is a more holistic
Right.
thing that can take place in a lot of different venues.
It's broader. Yeah.
And I don't think they
yeah.
have to be separate,
Hmm.
but I think there's more and more effort to get academia more into education. But
I do think it's a bit strange to me, just in my first like academia job now, that the more I look into possibilities for teaching on a long-term basis, the more I realized you can't really teach, at least not in political science, without also being an academic on the side. So if
I'm getting my PhD.
right. So I don't know if, for my particular case, I'm not sure if I want to do a PhD 3 or 4 years on like one particular subject. I just don't know. Am I that interested in any one thing? I don't think so. Certainly not at this point. But do
I
I
think that's
enjoy
really
teaching? I
wise.
do. I love it.
Yeah, I think that's really wise. And I think, very practical. If this were a mentor-mentee session back in PPLE,
Mm-hmm.
then I think there are lots of ways to teach without getting a PhD. There
Mhm.
might not be lots of ways to teach at a university
Mm.
in the long term.
Mm.
Like in the short term, doing what you're doing, which is doing tutor groups or working
Right.
groups, that's a great way to teach.
Right.
I think, ironically, like the teachers who do some of the most important teaching in the high school levels don't have to have PhDs, but then they have to specialize in teaching
Sure.
as opposed to subject matter, which is interesting.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing where a lot of the cracks in the system are.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's very wise. And I think it's also one of the reasons I couldn't have done a PhD right out of undergrad.
Mm.
I mean, if you were to be like, give me a time machine and say, let's forget all the butterfly effect stuff. Like you can keep
Yeah.
your kids and your spouse, but you can go
Right.
back and do a PhD in critical race and
Mhm.
legal history at age 24. I wouldn't
Mhm.
do it
Mhm.
because I don't think I had I think it's exactly what you said. I don't think I knew what I could spend 4 years
Right.
thinking, writing about until last year when I applied for this job.
Tell me a little bit about the PhD and also how you relate to it. What do you find important about it? What do you find compelling about it? You said earlier that you have to have fun, doing what you do. What about this PhD is fun to you?
Well, it's COVID time, right? So a lot of the things that I think are fun about academia, now I'll say academia, are not happening right now. Like it's really fun to sort of nerd out with other people who
Mhm.
are as into these topics as you are. And that is a very like colloquial way of talking about academic conferences or
Right.
presenting a paper and then having people really poke at it and see
Mhm.
what it sounds so I'm such a nerd. Presenting
No, but
a
it's
paper and having
I'm a nerd too.
feedback
It
is so
sounds kind of
fun.
fun if you put it that way.
It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
It's also really, again, like I think at this point, I keep staring at my bookshelf like it's going to give me the answers. It's really luxurious to like be paid to think about stuff. I mean, what a luxurious position is
Right.
that? I think it feels luxurious because I think I know that I will be okay on the other end of it because I've had all these other career experiences. So obviously I want to do a good job and I'm supposed to publish some articles and I want to do a good manuscript and I want it to be academically sound, but I'm much more intrinsically driven because I'm not really that worried about like, how am I going to get a job after this? Because I just know that I will.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what it will be, but I
Mhm.
know with confidence after this many years that I will be able to find employment.
Yeah.
And hopefully in a way that continues to fulfill me. And maybe it's that I'm finally accepting that I don't know what that looks like 5 years from now.
Mhm.
And I think it would be much harder to be 24 and be like, how
Yeah.
can I position myself
Right.
to get the job that I think that I want? When I'm also surrounded by people who have the job that they think that I want
Right.
and are going to try and help me get into that job, even if maybe that's not the best thing for me.
Yeah. I
Um,
certainly think that sort of like the myth of a straightforward career is something that we should just chuck that out. I think that
I know
yeah.
one person I know one person. My uncle worked for ExxonMobil
Mm-hmm.
from the day he graduated from graduate school
Mm-hmm.
until the day that he retired. He is the
Mm-hmm.
only person I know. And
How
even
did?
then, I guess he started
Yeah.
working for Exxon and it got bought by Mobil, or the other way around. I can't
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah.
One person.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just me.
Just
That's
isn't that.
anecdotal evidence.
I guess I could think of my father. My father's a doctor. I guess if you set yourself up for a medical degree, that tends to
That's
be
probably
like,
true.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe. But in anything sort of like humanities, liberal arts, I think, yeah,
Politics, law.
social
I
sciences,
actually
yeah.
think that's a good thing. I think it's like a good thing. But I will also say, again, I'm only speaking from my experience, and I
Yeah.
would be lying if I didn't say that there is a benefit to sticking somewhere
Mm.
of which I am sometimes envious.
Yeah.
Like I look at my friends who started at the Miami Public Defender's Office with me, and there were 20 of us who started in a class in 2005, and I think there are maybe 3 who are still there, and they're now like running the departments, and there's a as they should be,
Yeah.
because they have the depth of experience within that one job. So I think I definitely appreciate the benefit of sticking in one place, even though it's not what I have personally done.
Yeah. I find myself sort of, again, oscillating between it. Sometimes I also think like, wow, had I just, sometimes I think about law as something, because law, with a political science degree, specifically in Europe, I think, kind of, because there is no such thing as a graduate law degree. I don't think that you could just do. I sometimes think perhaps my interests and talents would have lent themselves to law as well. And with law, I would have had, because what law really does do, I think, is it opens up a range of possibilities. So I think employment as a law graduate in Europe is probably easier to come by as a graduate in political science.
Maybe. I think what you mean by easier is it's more obvious.
Right.
But maybe that's the same thing. But it's more obvious what a person with a law degree could do. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the right thing for you to do.
Yeah. But yeah. But then I also think that a lot of the positions that say we accept political science grads, if you knock on their door with a law degree, I think they'd be like, well, that seems fine to us.
Maybe. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think I would also have to wonder. Well, there are 2 sides. Like on the one hand, I think there are some lawyers who really embrace the identity and think that there's something miraculous about having had a legal training and that you can never think critically or methodically, like logically without it. I think there are also people with law degrees who realize, again, it's like what I said, it's a bounded system. It's a bounded way of thinking about things. And so there are certainly positions for which I think people don't want a lawyer. They want someone who's able to think outside that system.
Yeah.
Not that lawyers can't think outside that system or political science majors can't be bounded.
What are you saying, Alison?
I know, if we're going on stereotypes.
Yeah.
One
thing
go
ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think that's what draws people to law, is they feel like they know what a lawyer does.
Yeah. What you just mentioned about it's, I'm reading between the lines a little bit, sort of how like the law is so institutionalized that a lot of people sort of attribute like the ability to critically think to the law degree. It ties in a little bit to something you said earlier about law and how it really, it's made to operate within the boundaries of what already exists to kind of like continue to perpetuate what's already going on. So interesting to me how most politicians are lawyers by trade. I guess it would be the biggest group. I can't really think of another group. Certainly in the UK, probably in the US as well.
In the US, definitely. I'm laughing because I mean, my PhD, what I'm working on is like taking a critical approach to law and legal teaching. So I'm very much like on the mode of criticizing how we teach law, which is this very positivist way of like, this is what's written as law. So that means it's good law and this is how you apply it.
Yeah.
So I actually was looking at, I don't know in the Netherlands that most people in the Tweede Kamer, the parliament, are lawyers. Probably the good statistical answer is, while probably most of them aren't lawyers, they might be the largest group.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
I think that might be true.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's true. I think there's an idea that would then know how to write a law, which is hilarious because that's not what you study in law school.
Yeah.
Like, there's no legal drafting course that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess also if you study policy, I kind of think that if you study policy, you might just come from a different background. I feel like,
Maybe.
yeah, that's just an inkling that I have. I feel like if you study policy, maybe you are more theoretically interested. By and large, of course, I'm grossly generalizing now. But in Germany, because I have probably best insider information on Germany, if if you come from, let's say, a powerful family or something, and you say, I want to study law, that's just a lot more accepted than saying I want to study political science, because it's abstract to sort of like the current like ruling generation.
Well, I think that's very common. I mean, I go back to my parents in
Mm.
1997 who were like, please just take the law school entrance exam. They
Yeah.
weren't lawyers. They didn't have any
Yeah.
lawyers in the family. In fact, if anything, my dad is in business. He loves to complain about lawyers.
Yeah.
But still to him, like lawyer seemed like this respectable profession.
Right.
That like if you say my daughter is a lawyer, people will know or think they know what that means.
Yeah.
Whereas if you say my daughter is a political scientist, also, I don't think in America people would say my daughter is a political scientist unless you were like
Yeah.
a professor of political
Right.
science.
Right.
I think it would be more like an analyst at a think tank.
Yeah.
Then it's like I mean I'm like, well, what do you do? What do you do?
My granddad, before he passed away, he would always ask me, so what party are you going to join? Like what party are you going to be a politician for? And,
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. I believe we are past the 1 hour mark in our talk. This went by like
good.
that. Yeah.
You
but
can edit it down.
I will not. I will give them the entire glory of this conversation. Final thing, if people want to find you, how can they? Can they find you on LinkedIn, anything like that?
They can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way. I think, assuming that my research proposal gets approved for the next 4 years, I hope I will be at the kitlv.nl address. So that's one way to find me. Although I speak just for myself and not for the institution, of course.
Of course.
But yeah, after that, yeah, definitely LinkedIn tends to be. My general theory is like on LinkedIn, I say yes to most people, and on Facebook, I say no to most people. So, but I think that's also becoming like only dinosaurs are using Facebook anymore.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, what's a Facebook?
Yeah, exactly. What's a Facebook? Thanks for that, Lenny. Yeah, that's it. That's it. And like I said, I don't know. I can only speak for myself. I think the one thing that my takeaway, more responding to your law school comment, and which I think is a good final thought, is I think I'm still learning, but I wish I had known earlier. Just like it's just possible to accept two opposing thoughts in the same hand. I think the line I just read was, it can be both and instead of either or. Right? You probably would have been a very excellent law major. You're also a very excellent political science major. And I think we can like get obsessed with those paths not taken.
Right.
But at a certain point, you're just kind of on the path that you're on. And
I think that's great advice.
Yeah, you just have to appreciate what's there.
Yeah.
It's not always easily done, as it is said, but it's like the mantra that I try to stick with, I guess.
Right. Thank you. All right. Cool. Thank you so much, Alison. This was very insightful. I'm very much looking forward to sharing this with the world. I hope you have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, you too.
And we'll speak soon.
Take care.
Take care.